Here we have Barst. He seemed to be the most popular pick of the bunch last week, but there are definitely a lot of contenders. That kind of gave me the thought, if you guys want me to cover at least more than one over the course of each week, I wouldn't mind doing that. I don't know if that's too much for your liking. I don't mind doing 2 every week if it means I can cover more of these units that people want me to talk about. So just let me know if that's something you're interested in. But anyway, yeah, Barst. Barst is an interesting axe unit that we have because while his stat line isn't necessarily the best these days, he has a pretty decent preferred weapon, all things considered. And that's in the form of Devil Axe, which just grants him Spectrum 4 with Wrath, and he takes 4 damage after each combat, which has perfect synergy with something like Wrath. As far as the stats are concerned, 2 of the units that come to mind when comparing him are Pirate Daros and Summer Yeoger. Daros generally has a better stat line overall, with a bit more attack, 1 less speed, and a bit more defense and res, at the cost of being a Grail unit. Similarly with Summer Yeoger, she does have a bit more attack, she has relatively the same speed, relatively the same defense, and more resistance, at the cost of having 5 less HP. And if we were to compare Barst's stat line with his preferred weapon equipped, he would have a lot more stats. That being said, with the amount of axe inheritables in the game, it's very difficult for any axe unit realistically to be in a bad position. Especially someone like Summer Yeoger, who can make use of plug-in, deck swabber, all the sorts, which you can argue is also a lot better than Devil Axe in a sense because of the amount of stats it grants. Same with plug-in, as plug-in weapons are generally just kind of crazy as is. So for what it's worth, even with Barst having his own preferred weapon, I wouldn't necessarily say that puts him above a lot of his competition. Especially with similar stat lines, you could argue that all of them are relatively the same unit, even though Summer Yeoger is definitely a bit better. But in any case, Devil Axe puts Barst in a unique position that the other 2 can't fill because there's not an inheritable weapon similar to Devil Axe. And there's a decent amount of stuff you can do with it overall. So the first 2 builds I would like to cover are for general use only. The first one is definitely way more expensive. We have Devil Axe with a speed refine, we have Gale Force, we have Heavy Blade 4, we have low attack speed 3, times pulse, and attack speed solo. Now, the reason we're not using Wrath as a refine is because of consistency purposes. Generally speaking, you'd have to set it up, and the whole thing is that to substitute it, you have something like Time's Pulse to get you going with a 4 cooldown Gale Force. Combine that with Heavy Blade, and then the Spectrum 4 you get from Devil Axe, you can easily Gale Force off of that, on top of low attack speed, which can help secure doubles and Heavy Blade checks, as well as attack speed solo for more doubles and attack checks. And understandably so, I also noticed that a lot of people want to talk about budget purposes, so I figured we could also cover a budget skill set for Barst, where we have Devil Axe with the Wrath Refine, we have Glimmer, Fury 4, Desperation, Defense Smoke, and Brazen Attack Speed 3. It's your general Fury Desperation build, and it works here, all things considered. You will have to set up, which is the only drawback I can really think of, but once you get that going, you still get the true damage of the plus 10, and then at the start of every turn, you can get -1 cooldown, which means you can alleviate the use for any sort of accelerated cooldown skills, such as Heavy Blade and Flashing Blade. The reason you will want to use something like Fury 4 or Fury 3 is because you can easily knock him down into the Wrath range much faster, especially against foes that can counterattack. This just helps secure it even more. Likewise, because you're going to be going into the Wrath range anyway, you would want some sort of Brazen Seal. Personally, I would take that. You could always run a solo if you just want the immediate buffs, but if you're going to be setting up anyway, I don't think missing a seal for your first combat is going to be that big of a deal, at least for PvE purposes. And then you obviously have Defense Smoke, so you can hit harder with Glimmer. There's a good chance he's going to be doing a lot of damage. But honestly, you could go with either build personally. The B on the Gale Force set is also flexible if you want to put something like Desperation, you want to put Null Follow-Up, you want to put anything really of the sort that you think complements Gale Force. It's fairly flexible. And then we have our arena builds. The arena builds are also going to be relatively budget for both of them. The only really expensive skill for the first build is really just Distant Counter. And even then, you could probably substitute that for anything else if you wanted to, and then still run the Double Wrath set. But anyway, the Double Wrath set, basically the idea is that you're going to be running him in Water Season because he doesn't do well in much of the other seasons. Because of threats like Alm, who are going to outspeed, you got Celica, you got Roy, Edelgard, Lilina. You have a lot of threats, basically. Meanwhile, in Water Season, you're basically just covering Legendary Leaf and then a bunch of blues, which Barst can all take on. As far as taking down legendaries go, you could go double Wrath set with Distant Counter. Distant Counter is going to be for Legendary Leaf and then Azura. You have Noontime so you can heal back even more with double Wrath. You have Defense Smoke and you have Deflect Missile. Now, Noontime may seem kind of counterproductive with double Wrath, but you have to remember that he's going to be taking a lot of damage from these units anyway, so you would want to keep him in some sort of threshold just in case he does get attacked again. You can easily heal backups for a good amount. Likewise, you could always run a Brave Lucina as a support if you're going up against a Legendary Chrom, Dimitri, Azura, so you can have instant Noontime on Retaliation. That's always a good idea. You can run Infantry Rush, you can run Infantry Flash. Flash is probably going to be harder if you're not speed stacking him, but you can honestly go with either of those. And then Defense Smoke, again, similar reason, you hit harder. Now, Deflect Missile is going to be the interesting one here, because instead of using something like Spurn, Close Call, Repel, you're going to be running Deflect Missile for this build, so you can run double Wrath. And the reason Deflect Missile is important here is because without it, or without any sort of damage reduction, Leaf is going to cakewalk him. So what you can honestly do with this set is, this is basically just a big Legendary Leaf counter build, where you let him attack you, he takes you down to a good amount of health, and then you retaliate with double Wrath Noontime, which should one hit KO him. If not, then you do double anyway because he is slow, and you're going to need Deflect Missile for that because he can take on the first hit, but if he takes a second full hit, and we're talking max merge, double death blow, he's going to lose. This should allow you to bait him out as well, but it also doesn't hurt to run some sort of support in the back just in case. And then for Arena Assault, you could easily go with something like Slaying Hammer, double death blow, Axebreaker, just to counter all the Edelgards around. And for what it's worth, his attack is relatively decent, and then combined with 2 death blows and a Glimmer, you should be able to do more than enough to take him out. This can also work for, dragons who are armored. Granted, not the red ones. The red dragons are going to be a problem anyway because of the weapon triangle disadvantage. And they're already very high in defense, so I don't think you're going to be able to pierce through that. And because of his low resistance anyway, they may just one-shot in retaliation. This build's really just going to be covering like Edelgard, Surters, anything of the sort that's really just an axe armor. I don't think that's really too bad to have around, all things considered. So these would be your general purpose arena builds. And then finally we have our Aether Raids builds. The Aether Raids builds are going to differentiate depending on what kind of playstyle you like. So I made one for enemy phase tanking, and then I made one for player phase offense prowess kind of stuff. For the first one, you have the double axe with the Wrath Refine, you have Noontime, Distant Counter, you have Spurn, Pulse Smoke, and Attack Speed Solo. This is pretty much a cookie cutter build for a lot of enemy phase units. You have Distant Counter because of all the ranged units in Aether Raids. You have Spurn, which can also pair well with Double Axe because it adds 5 more true damage when special triggers. You have Noontime obviously because you want to keep some sort of sustain, and Double Axe may be a problem of sorts because it does damage you for 4 after every combat. And then you have Pulse Smoke, which can disable a lot of infantry pulse stuff. And here it kind of gets tricky because now we have Pent, and Pent can make Pulse Smoke worthless, and he may be common depending on if people spark for him. You can honestly replace Pulse Smoke 3 with really anything you want. You can run a Joint Drive, you can run a Smoke, you can run anything of the sort. And Attack Speed Solo is also fairly standard. You get more attack, you get more speed, which can help with spurning. And then we have our fully offensive build as a Gale Force unit. You have Ninja Masakari, you have Gale Force, Flashing Blade, Wings of Mercy, Times Pulse, and Attack Speed Bond. Ninja Masakari isn't a bad weapon by any means, but the lack of slaying does hurt, which is why I would recommend running something like Times Pulse. Or you don't necessarily need Times Pulse, you just need something that can reduce his cooldown by 1. And he won't be the main Gale Forcer because you can't get his HP below a certain threshold without either like a bolt trap if you're lucky or some sort of other shenanigans, but it's not consistent, which is why you want him to have like you want him to be the support for your main Gale Forcer, such as something like Ninja Lin, where you run Fury 4 or whatever skills you want, Disarm Trap, and once she gets below a certain HP threshold, that's when you fly in with Wings of Mercy Barst, and you Gale Force off that. And granted, you don't need Flashing Blade 4, you can run Heavy Blade 4, you can run Flashing Blade 3, Heavy Blade 3, any of the blades realistically. And because he's going to be flying in through Wings of Mercy, you would want something that can raise his attack power by a lot, which is why you could honestly go with Attack Speed Bond. He won't need it after the first combat because afterwards he's probably going to be getting the Gale Force off, provided there isn't any guard of sorts. So the idea is that he's going to be a support unit for your Gale Forcer. But what you can essentially do is set up for the main Gale Forcer, swoop in with him, he can Gale Force, then you have dancers that come in, you can do even more if you want to. But yeah, you have flexibility. And you don't necessarily need to run Ninja Masakari either. Thankfully, it's in the Grail Shop, so it's easier to access. So I would personally take that over something like Brave Axe if you can. But that's pretty much the idea. And the reason I choose Astra for all this instead of something like Light, I think you'll have a better time running this in Astra because of the attack mythics and the speed mythics that we do have there. We have our free Reagan. If you were around when the last Hero Rises happened, people have their free Altina, which can help make up for Ninja Masakari's might, which is why I would probably recommend running it there. And then those are essentially all of the builds. So let me know if you want more builds geared towards free to play, you want more builds in general, and then that pretty much covers Barst. Also, just feel free to let me know what you want to see next, and if you want me to cover 2 units every week instead of 1, because I'm more than happy to. Hopefully this provided some sort of help and guidance. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.